This is the Louie Tee Network.
In the lab room.
10 minutes or less. New Orleans Saints.
Welcome, you are in the lab room. I am your host, Lou. Thank you for joining me here on this program, 10 minutes or less. New Orleans Saints. Clock me up. Let's go. New Orleans Saints season rewind. And you look at this Saints football team, they get their commander-in-chief back in the saddle. Sean Payton's back. You know they're going to light it up in 2013. You had to know that this Saints team was going to be on a mission. And right out of the gate, they come out firing on all cylinders. They're 5-0 to start the season off. Everything's peaches and cream in New Orleans. And then they lose right before the bye week. And this was a season full of should-haves. This was a season full of should-haves for the New Orleans Saints. They should have won that game against the Patriots. They had it, and they played not to lose down the stretch. They end up losing the football game at the very end, going to their bye week at 5-1. They come off the bye week, and they win 4 out of their next 5 games. Gets them to 9-2, heading into a huge Monday Night Football showdown versus the Seattle Seahawks. They get drubbed in that football game due these Saints. However, they bounce back and do a drubbing of their own the very next week on Sunday Night Football in a huge intra-divisional matchup against the Carolina Panthers. So at this point, after the beatdown that they dished out to the Panthers, the Saints should win this division, okay? They should win this division because even if you go to Carolina, which you're going to do, and I told Saints fans this, I told Panthers fans this, if you want to win a division, Panthers, you need to go into New Orleans and win. And they didn't. And I told the Saints, you're not going into Carolina and winning, so you need to win at home. If you win at home, all you got to do is win the rest of your games except that Carolina game, and you will win this division. So at this point, they should win the division. But of course, in New Orleans Saints fashion, they go and lay a stinker, an absolute egg in St. Louis and lose that game, then proceed to go to Carolina the very next week, lose that football game, and then they come back home, beat the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to ensure themselves of a postseason berth at 11-5. They get in as a wild card, did not win the division. That distinction went to the Carolina Panthers at 12-4. So they blew the chance to win the division, but they still get in. They got to go to Philadelphia in wild card weekend. They go to Philadelphia. They get it done against the Eagles in a gaudy performance. Then they go back on the road to the place that was the house of horrors for them in week number 12. Of course, I'm talking about Seattle. But this time, it's a much more competitive football game. They hang tough, but the offense did not do enough. The defense played well enough for them to win that football game. The offense, however, did not. And so that's where their season ended in Seattle to the eventual Super Bowl champion. So a solid season, nonetheless, for the New Orleans Saints. But again, you look at what could have been, what should have been, but it wasn't for the Saints in 2013. So now we fast forward to 2014 in the offseason. And this is going to be a very interesting offseason for the Saints, to say the least. We'll talk about that here in a second. Let's run down the list of free agents for this Saints football team before we jump into why this offseason is going to be so interesting. You look at their free agents: Luke McCown, Robert Meacham, Jimmy Graham, Charles Brown, Zach Strief, Brian De La Puente, Kenyon Coleman, Kenta Dawson, Paris Harrison, Will Herring, Ramon Humber, Malcolm Jenkins, and these last 3 are all restricted free agents in Raphael Bush, Jed Collins, and wide receiver Joe Morgan. So you look at the list of these players, and first things first, you got to look at the amount of space you have to work with if you are the New Orleans Saints, okay? And you look at the space that they've got to work with. and they're up against the cap. I mean, their cap situation stinks. They had to void the contracts of 5 players just to get back to respectability in terms of the cap. So their cap situation is not the best right now. They're not in a healthy cap state right now. But with the cap being elevated probably over $10 million in this upcoming new league season, that's going to help the Saints tremendously. They're going to have to probably move some money around, talk to Drew Brees, get him to reallocate some of his money to give them a little bit more breathing space, because let's attack the elephant in the room right now. Jimmy Graham isn't going anywhere. They've already slapped him with the franchise tag. That could be a fight in the making, because Jimmy Graham is a guy that splits out wide as a receiver more so than as a tight end. So he's probably looking for the wide receiver distinction as a franchise tag, not the tight end tag, because there's a lot more money involved. We're talking about over $3 million more worth of money when you're talking about a wide receiver versus a tight end. So he's looking for the wide receiver distinction. They've got to work out some kind of long-term deal. But in the meantime, he's not going anywhere, but you're eating up a huge portion of that cap right now with Jimmy Graham. A huge portion of a cap that already isn't a lot to begin with. So, and you've got a lot of things that you want back out of that list of players that I just named. Let's go through that list and talk about guys that I think you want back. And you look at some of these restricted free agents, and I know Joe Morgan was injured last year, but he's a big play waiting to happen. And you went out and brought back Robert Meacham because Joe Morgan was injured. But Joe Morgan is Robert Meacham 5 years ago. So Joe Morgan is an upgrade over Robert Meacham. You don't need both of those guys back. Meacham is a free agent. Morgan is a free agent. Both of those guys are your home run threats, your big deep ball guys. But Joe Morgan is way more explosive than Robert Meacham. So you want Joe Morgan back. And you don't have to pay a lot to get him back. So that's the guy that I think you need to bring back. How about Raphael Bush? What about that hit he put on Percival Harvin in the NFC divisional round football game last season? Phenomenal. I thought his hit set the tone for the football game. It was part of the reason why these Saints played as well as they did. You've already parted ways with Roman Harper. I just told you that Malcolm Jenkins is a unrestricted free agent. So you've got questions at safety. And I think you want him back because it's not going to cost you a lot. And I like Raphael Bush a lot. And not to mention, he's a big contributor on special teams as well. What about Malcolm Jenkins? Speaking of the safety position, what about Malcolm Jenkins? I think you want Malcolm Jenkins back. I've said this for a long time, up until last year when you went out in free agency and got yourself a #1 corner. I thought that he was the best thing you had in your secondary. Sure, he's out of position a number of times, but a lot of times he's trying to make up for somebody else's mess that they made, and so it makes him look bad. But I like Malcolm Jenkins, and don't think for one second that if you don't want him back, somebody else won't take him. I think that's a guy you want back, but we'll see what the Saints have in store, because again, I'm talking about all these guys you want back, but again, you don't have any money. So we'll see how this goes. And we know the Saints always spend their money on the offensive side of the football. Before they spend any money on defense, they're spending it on the offense. And they always want to protect Drew Brees. Now, you've got a couple of guys that you want back. One in particular that you need back. Zach Strief and Brian De La Puente. Now look, the Saints always elect to protect Drew Brees up the middle. And we know this to be a fact. They'll spend money on the interior offensive linemen before they spend money on the tackles. That's why their big left tackle last year was allowed to hit the market and go to Chicago in Jermon Bushrod. So they're going to spend money on the interior because Drew Brees, shorter quarterback, needs space to step up in the pocket. Brian De La Puente isn't going anywhere. He can't go anywhere because you have to make sure that the inside of this offensive line is solidified. And Brian De La Puente, with the guards that you have on your roster, does that for you. So if anybody's walking in this situation out of the two linemen that I just named, it's going to be Zach Strief. He's going to hit the market, and he's going to be playing elsewhere in 2014. But Brian De La Puente isn't going anywhere because the Saints always like to keep their interior offensive line solidified and intact And bringing back Brian De La Puente would do exactly that for you. So you look at that, and there are a lot of guys I just named that you want back on this football team, but everybody can't be back. And so you're going to have to part ways with some guys you would have loved to have had back, but that's just the nature of the beast in New Orleans when you don't have any money. So you go to team needs, and you look at this Saints football team, and because of all of the guys that you're probably going to have to part ways with, you're going to have holes on your roster. I just told you Zach Street probably not going to be back. That leaves a hole at right tackle. Brian De La Puente. Is he going to be back? Isn't he going to be back? If he is back, you don't need a center. But if he isn't back, you need a center. I think he's going to be back, but in case he's not, you need a center. You look at another position, linebacker. Okay, you've got a lot of linebackers that I just named, none of which you're hurting to bring back. You just cut ties with another linebacker, and you're playing a 3-4 defense. One of the most important positions in a 3-4 defense is the linebacker position. You need more depth. You need more linebackers. You need guys that can get after the quarterback on the edges. You need linebacker help, especially outside linebacker help. You look at another position. I just talked about 2, 3 possibly safeties that could not be back on this roster. You already cut ties with Roman Harper. I told you that Malcolm Jenkins is on the block. And I told you that Raphael Bush is a restricted free agent as well. So you need safety help. Whether you bring guys back or not, you're going to need some help at the safety position. So Saints need a lot of help in various areas. They got to take care of their own first and foremost before they even go looking out on the free agent market. Take care of home, then you go out and see if you got any money left, which you probably won't. And then you just need to start doing your damage in the draft. Right tackle, draft. Outside linebacker, draft. Safety, draft. If you don't bring your stuff back, you need to do your homework and hit some home runs via the draft. That was the New Orleans Saints in 10 minutes or less.
10 minutes or less.
Like the content? Want more? Sub up.